Hi, this is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoyed this critical thought, a detailed discussion on game design, and be sure to subscribe and you can pitch future critical thought topics. Alright, everybody, for today's critical thought, I got a good topic for you. We're going to be talking about role-playing shooters, or RPS. And this is in response to my time spent playing the Destiny beta and probably doing a dissecting design on Borderlands 2 in the near future. But role-playing shooting is a very interesting subgenre to talk about, as it's the intersection between two very different and polarized elements of game design. And this is based on an article I wrote many years ago regarding action versus abstraction gameplay or progression. Action progression refers to the player themselves growing or using their own skill to play a game. So you can look at this as memorizing button combos in fighting games, high APM in strategy titles, figuring out the best ways of movement and fine adjustments in a platformer, and more. While abstraction refers to the character or items in-game impacting how the player plays or grows. So leveling up, finding legendary weapons, getting lucky with rolls during attacks, and we can see this in just about any game with RPG-based systems. And in the article, I talk about how these two polar opposites operate at different extremes of a spectrum. So on one end, you have games that are completely action dependent, stuff like Devil May Cry, Ninja Gaiden, Super Meat Boy, and the like. And on the other side, you have games that are completely about the in-game abstraction or rules dictating success or failure. Stuff like Final Fantasy, XCOM, Civilization. Again, you can pick an RPG and will fit there. And one of the things that I talked about in that article was how we were starting to see more and more games start to come in and get closer to the middle, where we start to see RPGs with action elements and action games with RPG elements. So you have stuff like the progression systems in Call of Duty, games like Demon's Souls or The Witcher that have a lot of RPG elements to how the character grows and improves, but it's still a heavy emphasis on the player's actions. And role-playing shooting, or we'll just make the acronym RPS, or we just use that for the rest of this piece, is definitely more on the middle ground. And despite being there, I've yet to find one of these games that I have absolutely, without any hesitation or thought, have fallen completely in love with. And it's very interesting about that, considering when we talk about ARPGs, which are again another middle ground between action and RPG gameplay. And the reason has to do with the fact that action and abstraction in their extremes, again, are polar opposites. If I'm playing a very abstracted RPG, it doesn't matter how hard I push down the buttons or jam on the control stick, it's not going to make my fireball do more damage or give me a higher chance to hit. Likewise, if I'm playing a heavy action game, having a weapon that does +2 fire damage doesn't mean much if I'm busy trying to memorize button combos and getting the timings down for dodges and counters and the like. And when it comes to the RPS genre, it's a really good example of that kind of ludodissonance that we've talked about recently. And when it comes to the RPS, there are, right now at the moment, there's 3 big ones that I've played, not counting Destiny, which I will be coming back to Destiny in a few minutes to get your thoughts on it. But the first one that I played that just didn't work for me was Fallout 3. And I know there are lots of fans of the Bethesda series, especially Skyrim and Fallout 4, but Fallout 3 I bounced off it faster than you can insert a Fallout-related analogy here. Now, to be fair, I was never a big fan of the Skyrim RPG design. That would take us another video to get to at the moment. But when it came to Fallout 3, and I assume by extension Fallout 4, this was an RPG with first-person shooting elements. What that meant was the abstraction about the RPG side factors in from me pointing the trigger at the enemy, pulling it, and then letting the bullet hit and calculating damage. So it didn't matter if I was aiming point blank at an enemy if my gun accuracy or my overall accuracy was still too low. And then even if I shot the enemy, there was still calculation to determine if I actually did any damage. This was a game where I could shoot someone in the head 3 times, one bullet could barely hurt him, the second one could cause a massive crit damaging his eye, and the third one could just do moderate damage, even if I'm just shooting the same spot each time. And that kind of ludodissonance was just too much for me to ignore. This was a game where you can shoot someone in the face and it would say, barely did any damage. Now, the extreme or the opposite end of that is, of course, Borderlands. And to be fair, Borderlands is a series that I've liked, but like I said, I've never completely fell in love with. And if Fallout was an RPG with first-person shooting elements, Borderlands is a first-person shooter with RPG elements. And again, it sounds very similar, but the difference is how the focus of the systems are at. In Borderlands, from when I'm aiming and shooting, there is no abstraction. If I'm not properly aiming my gun, I'm not going to hit the guy no matter what the accuracy of that gun is. There's no in-game accuracy stat that will make me magically shoot better. And if I shoot someone in the head, we only need a calculation to determine if I do extra damage. I'm going to do extra damage. And that was a really great thing I did like about Borderlands, is you had enemies with critical weak spots. For most humanoids, it was the head. Some of the enemies had like a glowing bit on parts of their body, stuff like that. And it was just a way of rewarding careful aiming. The abstraction came into play once the bullet connected. And this is when the elements such as the element of the gun, the actual damage of the gun, the level differences, the enemy's armor, stuff like that, all became a major part of whether or not I did massive damage. And with Borderlands, the dissonance came in with just where the RPG elements started to factor or override the actual gameplay. Anyone who's played Borderlands into the late game, into New Game Plus, you probably found many of those enemies to become very bullet spongy. And this is when things got very repetitive and annoying, because it didn't matter how great I was at shooting an enemy if my guns were just barely doing any damage. And the level factor also started to become more and more annoying. Because Borderlands features a leveling system like an RPG, you had cases where if the enemy was a certain number of levels above you, you literally couldn't do anything. Basically, the game would just overwhelmingly stack defense, so that if your gun would normally do 100 to 200 points of damage to a normal enemy, this enemy would do 5. And of course, they would get a massive bonus to attack you because you're a lower level. But again, this is where that dissonance comes into play, because there is no in-game reason why one common thug can shrug off bullets, while the thug next to him, I can shoot him and he dies in one shot, and it's the same gun I'm using. Now, with Borderlands, I do have a few other issues with it, but they are beyond the discussion of RPS design. Or, I forgot the thing, FPS, there we go. No, role-playing at RPS. Again, too many acronyms for me to keep track of in my head. Now, the third example and where this ludodissonance really gets to extreme lengths is The Division. And I've talked about The Division before. It was one of my favorite games of 2016, but I had to preface this with the fact that I played it after patch 1.04. But this was another one of those games where the dissonance got to the point of being very distracting. In this game, you're fighting against everyday people, citizens of New York, who are, some of them are in military garb, some are in, heavy coats, they're looters, homeless, stuff like that. And you can walk up to someone and shoot them in the face with a machine gun, and they will resist that damage because of... I don't know why they resist it. I don't think there's any in-game lore as to why and what makes someone an elite looter versus a normal or a common looter. But this was a problem where it had a good basis in terms of its combination of the third-person shooting with the abstraction of the guns. But it just never managed to go beyond that. This was a game where the RPG progression comes and goes very quickly. I believe the level cap was, I want to say 20. It could be 30. It's been several months since I played it. But once you hit max level cap, that's it in terms of actual progression. You're going to find better weapons, higher gear rating, stuff like that, but a handgun with a gear rating of 1350 versus a handgun with a gear rating of 1720, there's no difference. How I shoot that gun, how I aim and deal with stability is going to be the same no matter what. And that's the problem that I ran into the Division, that the RPG side just didn't get in depth enough to really impact things. And it's kind of, again, very different to something like Borderlands, where I felt the RPG side kind of affected things too much in terms of overall progression. But that's the nature and rub of role-playing shooting, is that you're trying to fit two square pegs together. And again, when you have these two polar opposites, something has to give. Either the RPG side has to be downplayed, or the action side has to be downplayed. But having them both be a 50-50 split is just next to impossible. And with that said, this is where I want to bring up Destiny. As you know, I did the Destiny 2 beta the other day, which gave me no real indication as to how the RPS elements work. So I want to ask you folks, the ones who have played Destiny, whether it's just the base campaign or all the DLC and expansions, how did that game handle the RPS elements? Was this a game where you could build a character to your own unique specifications and have that augment your shooting? Or was this a game with a heavy first-person shooting elements to it, and the RPG side was more of just a layer on top of that? Please let me know in the comments below. But to wrap up today's critical thought, like I said, the role-playing shooting genre should be something that I should fall in love with, given my love of ARPGs, like Path of Exile, Grim Dawn, Diablo, of course, and the like. But when we're dealing with a genre that has for the most part been predominantly about the player's skill, throwing in these additional layers tends to muddy the waters. Now, before anyone says anything, Call of Duty I don't think I would consider an example of a role-playing shooter. It has RPG layers to it in the form of its progression model, but at the end of the day, it's still predominantly a first-person shooter skill base. But I guess what I would like to see from the genre, like I just said, with it being impossible to get 50-50, will be to try to get as close to that as possible. I want a game that is skill-based and dependent, like Doom or Quake, or even something like Bulletstorm. But I also want the option to spec out my character and build something unique and have all these guns and loot augment that. So basically I'm thinking like Doom 2016 meets World of Warcraft. So any developers watching this right now, get on that. But to wrap up today's critical thought, what do you think of the role-playing shooter genre? Again, I am sure there are fans watching this who love Borderlands, Fallout, The Division, and so on. But what made you fall in love with the genre versus playing either a predominantly RPG or a predominant first-person shooter? Let me know in the comments below. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching today's video. If you're new, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. And if you have a suggestion for a future vlog, let me know. But otherwise, have a great day. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And come back around 10 Eastern for regular streaming. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on game development, be sure to check out game-wisdom.com. Follow me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates throughout the day. And to help support everything that I do, you can find me on Patreon under GWBycer or Game Wisdom. Your donations can help to keep things running, and when we hit some goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy. So, Thanks again for watching, and be sure to come back for daily discussions on game design on the Game Wisdom channel.